All right, UACPA members and friends, here we are with Jim Bean. He's a member of our Centennial Committee and restoration expert. We have some wonderful machines to kind of go over today, and since Jim knows the most of them, we're going to have him explain a little bit of what they did and how they work to you. So Jim, go ahead and take it away. We're going to start right here.
Okay, long before smartphones, you know how powerful these are, and computers and all that kind of stuff. The big innovations of the time, 100 years ago, was equipment like this. These were amazing technology at the time, and people had left doing things by hand or using something like an abacus, which had been used for centuries. These were the new thing. These three machines, the comptometer, this adding machine, and this Burroughs bookkeeping machine, were all somewhat of the same time period. 19 teens to 1920s, but they serve different functions. This bookkeeping machine calculates manually, does the calculations manually, but there's an electric motor under here, which would have been using electricity for something like this, would have been new. Mostly had been just used for lights and telephone and things like that. This motor, from what I can figure out, just drives the paper mechanism to drive that up, but the printing and the calculations were just driven by this hand-operated unit to the side here. This is extremely heavy. It took two of us to pick this up off the back of my vehicle and put it back on this stand. It by itself is probably near 100 pounds, and the frame and that is a lot of cast iron. So extremely heavy, probably mostly used in accounting offices and places that could afford a very expensive and cumbersome machine, but for the time it was incredible. Here you can enter the month of the year, the date, and then your numbers. As you can see, if the decimal point was here, it wouldn't go up to. These keys here clear mistakes you may have made by row, but if you wanted to wipe out everything you had entered and go with something else, you can't push two keys in the same column. You would push this and it would clear these out. There's other functions where you're moving this. Well, I'm thinking of the other one. I didn't figure out all of the functions here, but this is quite a unique unit because it's showing the total down here in the window. And as you do a calculation, you can see the movement of some of the keys inside there. Some of the number calculators. I have that metal pan under there because oil from the pump, the electric motor in the pump, will drive something in there, can leak and be quite the mess. In comparison, this would have been much more portable, still quite heavy. I would say this is probably 30 or 40 pounds. Pretty darn heavy. A lot of cast iron in it too. You decide what number you're going to put in there, and put your finger there and move the number up, and that's the number that would print. You've got to be careful not to move it. Another one. So that would be your number, and then you would, by putting that down, you would add it to the total there and print it there. The printing mechanism on this isn't working too well. And if you made a mistake, you can't go back down on these, so you've got to push on this, pull on this to clear it again. If you want to zero something out, the total here, you push this down and do like that, and it totals out 0 here. If you want to print a total that's on there, you pull this down and pull this and it'll print the total that was there. Quite the handy little thing. This was in the same time period as these others, but it served a specific function. It was a key-driven calculator. And so by key-driven, you can see these numbers here. Every number you push here, the bell rings when you do the first entry. You push these numbers and they just continually add what's there. If you did a 5 on top of that, the 934. This continual key-driven adding. So if you just push quite a few, using all 4 of your fingers, several in a row, that would all add up. And so a comptometer operator could move quite quickly, because you could enter the whole number all at once, in contrast to a key entry or an entry like this. You're doing one at a time. You can do these quite quickly. There is no tape on it, so I would guess that the individual doing the calculation would have another person run it, and if they agreed, then they'd feel pretty good that the calculation was done properly. And with these, going back to this one and this one, these large numbers on the key is when you're doing addition, and you use the small number that's on there when you're doing subtraction. I did not figure out how the subtraction process worked, but that was the idea, was to have that subtraction ability to happen. This is quite important to me because my grandmother, as I noted here, grandmother was a file clerk in the 40s and made 75 cents an hour. But when she became trained on this, became a trained comptometer, which took months to do, so that you could move quite quickly. She doubled her salary to $1.50 an hour by becoming trained on that. These were so important to offices that they were still being used into the 1970s. Obviously a newer version of this, but the same comptometer key-driven concept would have been something that a lot of people would have been reluctant to go away from it, just because it was so fast and productive. I don't know if later versions had a print tape on them. They might have, and then that would have made it so you wouldn't have to go through, and you would only have to check off the list on a tape instead of having to rerun it to verify the total number. This lever on the side zeroes this out, so you can start over again. And these little levers here have something to do with whether it's going to do subtraction or something. I didn't figure that out. The next machine here is the F&E check writer. Well, this particular model was produced about 1920, but in 1914 these were invented, and at the time they were the premier fraud prevention mechanism or tool of the time, because check alteration and forgery was the huge fraud of that time period, and having this emboss and put in ink the amount you wanted on the check would have been huge. It cut down on the fraud happening through the check avenue quite significantly. Okay, this is the tower unit. I really couldn't find much on the internet on this, but it's very similar to the Victor model. Victor was much bigger. This might have been a knockoff because you can't find many of them, or I couldn't find any information about them on the internet. The numbers, of course, would have been entered about the same way. They would have been on those bigger machines, but the incredible thing about this is its weight. That would have been considered quite portable when you compare it to these other big behemoths. If you call that portable. But it's still mechanical and not electronic. and not computer related to computers, of course. Moving on to something that appeared to be done in probably about the 1940s. I didn't work on this machine, but it has the 10 key concept that we are more used to on our electronic calculators and on our computer keyboards. But so you would have to, that would have been a little bit slower actually compared to the comptometer, where you could have entered the entire number in one push and just do them real quickly. But it was, I imagine, more efficient, and of course it's about as heavy, that is heavy as that one. The 10 key concept was easier for people to manipulate, because you could do it with one hand, whereas this would have been a little more to cover and move your hand around. For these machines, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were all machines that J. Niederhauser had collected from various offices and whatever over the years, and just passed down through what he accumulated or had seen and didn't want to see thrown away. And all of these have collector interest in them, because they're quite fascinating. I talk about these in a little more of an article, in the centennial issue of that's coming out this month, about the machines used in offices and these kind of things. I mentioned 3 of these in the article, and it's quite interesting to me to clean this and to see how they operated and see what was innovative and high tech at that time. So it was quite fun doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. Come down to the UACPA office to take a look at these yourselves. Feel free to come by anytime for some refreshments and looking at some history. You can see we have plenty here, and we have some members over here looking at the history of the organization. So thank you so much, Jim, for taking your time and restoring these and explaining a little bit about their use. So we'll look forward to seeing you at UACPA. Bye-bye.
Thanks.